In the late 20th century, in a quiet industrial region of north-central China, there unfolded a case that would haunt investigators for nearly 2 decades. It came to be known as the Baiyin serial murders. Not a single crime, but a sequence. Not a single victim, but 11. And behind them all, one man. The full title recorded in official archives was the Gansu Baiyin serial assault and homicide case. Between 1988 and 2002, over a span of 14 years, 11 women were killed inside their own homes. Several victims were assaulted, some even after death. The youngest among them was only 8 years old. Investigators would later describe the offender's progression not as sudden brutality, but as something that evolved, learned, refined, perfected. On May 26, 1988, in Baiyin City, a 23-year-old factory worker was found dead in her apartment on Yongfeng Street. Her neighbors had called her Little White Shoes, a nickname inspired by her appearance and neat style. She was considered strikingly pretty. When police examined the scene, they found she had suffered 26 stab wounds. Her throat had been cut so deeply it was nearly severed. Her clothing had been displaced during the attack. Investigators initially believed the killer had followed her home and entered secretly. Years later, after his arrest, the perpetrator would confess something different. He said he had intended to steal. He said she woke up. He said he panicked. And then he killed her. At the time, she lived with family members. The attacker had first lingered outside, heard loud radio noise inside the apartment, and realized someone was home, but likely asleep. Peering through the window, he saw her resting. He entered to steal, but when she awoke, violence replaced theft. This distinction matters because in many serial crimes, the first offense is chaotic. Mistakes are common. The offender is frightened, uncertain, reactive. That pattern appeared here as well. Afterward, the killer later admitted he was terrified. He had read detective stories and believed police dogs might track his scent. For days, he feared capture. But nothing happened. And when nothing happened, his fear began to fade. At the time of the first murder, the killer was only 24 years old, young, inexperienced, and suddenly in possession of a terrible secret. For 6 years, there was silence. No attacks, no clues, no suspect. Investigators would later realize this silence was not remorse. It was incubation. On July 27, 1994, around mid-afternoon, a 19-year-old temporary worker was found dead in her dormitory room. Her injuries resembled the first victim's, but worse. She had 36 stab wounds. This escalation is a pattern frequently observed in repeat offenders. The violence intensifies as inhibition weakens. The act itself becomes less frightening and more compelling. Three years later, on March 28, 1997, another woman was murdered. This time the crime occurred not in Baiyin, but in Baotou, a city hundreds of kilometers away. She had been bound with rope, her clothing removed. Evidence indicated sexual assault. Because of the distance between the two cities, Local police did not initially connect this crime to the earlier killings. They appeared unrelated, separate, independent. They were not. The killer had simply traveled there for temporary work. After the third murder, the intervals between attacks shortened. 6 years, then 3, then less than 1. Investigators later theorized why. Once the offender realized he had not been caught, confidence replaced fear. Each successful escape reinforced the belief that he was untouchable. And in 1998, something changed dramatically. The year 1998 would become the most violent period in the entire case. After his arrest, the killer himself admitted that during that year, if he did not kill, he felt restless, agitated, unsatisfied. The first victim of that year was discovered on January 16th, though forensic evidence suggested she had died 3 days earlier. She had 16 stab wounds. Portions of skin had been removed from her body. This detail marked a turning point. The offender was no longer acting only to kill. He had begun taking items from victims as trophies. 3 days later, January 19th, another woman was murdered. She had 8 stab wounds. Larger sections of skin were missing than in the previous case. Notice the shift. Earlier victims had dozens of wounds. Now the number decreased, while mutilation increased. In behavioral profiling, such transitions often suggest psychological adaptation. The offender no longer needed repeated stabbing to achieve emotional release. He had discovered another method that satisfied him more. Several months later came one of the most devastating crimes in the series. An 8-year-old girl was found dead in her family's residence. She had been home alone during summer vacation while her mother worked. Her father traveled frequently for his job. Her mother later recalled a fleeting thought that morning, whether she should lock the door from the outside for safety. She decided not to, fearing her daughter might need to leave in an emergency. When she returned home, the curtains were drawn. The apartment was silent. After searching, she discovered her child's body hidden inside a wardrobe. On a table nearby sat a cup of tea. Investigators believe the child may have prepared it for someone she recognized, someone she trusted enough to let inside. Years later, the killer confessed he had made the tea himself. He said he was thirsty after the murder. That detail unsettled investigators more than the violence itself. Not the act, but the calm afterward. Before the final murders, there was something rare in this case: a survivor. In early 2001, during the Spring Festival period, a female factory worker returned home to her apartment. She sensed someone behind her. A man had followed her to her door. The moment she unlocked it and stepped inside, he moved. He pushed forward, attempting to force his way in with her. By then, rumors of the serial killer had already spread through the city. Residents whispered about him, feared him, imagined him everywhere. And in that instant, she understood what might be happening. Her reaction was immediate. She turned sharply, shoved him backward, and slammed the door shut. Inside, her heart raced. Outside, silence. But the encounter was not over. Later, when her husband returned home, the couple noticed something chilling. The man was back. He appeared outside their window, watching them, smiling. The sight froze them both. They called police immediately. Officers arrived within minutes. As the couple described what they had seen, one responding officer suddenly realized something. On his way to the call, he had passed a man matching that exact description. Police searched the surrounding area for nearly a full day. They found nothing. Yet the encounter had produced something investigators had never truly had before in this case. Witnesses. The task of reconstructing the suspect's face fell to a forensic sketch specialist widely respected among investigators. Before drawing, he interviewed each witness separately: the woman, her husband, and the officer who had passed the suspect on the street. He quickly noticed something. Among the three, the woman's memory was the sharpest. Not because she had seen the suspect longest, but because she had seen him 3 times. First, when he tried to force his way inside. Second, when she spotted him outside the window. Third, when she and her husband looked at him together. 3 encounters, 3 impressions burned into memory. For 3 days, the artist worked carefully, translating recollection into form, line by line, feature by feature. When the sketches were finished, investigators compared them. They were not perfect, not exact, but they were close. Roughly 60%, perhaps 70%. In most cases, that might not be enough, but in Baiyin, at that time, it was the clearest image police had ever possessed. And for investigators who had spent years chasing shadows, even a partial face was something solid at last. In November 2000, another woman was killed in her home. In May 2001, a nurse was attacked. Despite catastrophic injuries, she managed to call emergency services before losing consciousness. She later died in hospital from blood loss. The very next day, another woman was murdered in a hotel room. Less than a year later, in February 2002, a 25-year-old woman became the 11th victim. The method was nearly identical to earlier crimes. Then, it stopped. One detail puzzled investigators from the beginning. Every attack occurred during daylight hours. Most violent crimes of this nature happen at night. Darkness offers concealment. But this offender chose daytime, often in populated neighborhoods. Why? Some investigators believed he derived psychological satisfaction from committing crimes in broad daylight. Others suspected a practical reason. He lived far outside the city and traveled long distances by bicycle. If he wanted to commit a crime and return home the same day, daylight was necessary. There was another possibility. Many residents worked factory shifts during the day, leaving homes empty. Daytime, paradoxically, may have been safer for him than night. Police did recover evidence at crime scenes: fingerprints, biological traces, shoe impressions. But forensic technology at the time was limited. The evidence could not be matched to any individual in national records. Investigators concluded all the murders were committed by the same person, yet they had no name. Early profiling suggested the killer lived in Baiyin. That assumption guided years of investigation. Thousands of local men were screened. None matched. The assumption was wrong. The killer did not live in the city. Rumors spread among residents. One widely believed story claimed the killer targeted women wearing red clothing. Many women stopped wearing red entirely. The rumor was false, but fear rarely requires truth. For years, the case remained unsolved. Then in 2016, authorities reopened cold cases using new forensic technology, including YSTR analysis, which examines markers on the Y chromosome passed along paternal lines. During an unrelated investigation, police collected DNA from a man suspected of bribery. His genetic profile showed a close paternal match to the unknown killer's sample. This did not identify the murderer, but it identified his family line. Investigators traced male relatives within that lineage. One name stood out. When police collected his fingerprints and DNA, the match was immediate. After nearly 30 years, the killer had a name. Witnesses later said he appeared calm most of the time, even gentle. He ran a small shop at a technical school. He cared for his disabled father. Neighbors described him as polite and soft-spoken. Duality is common in offenders of this type, a benign public persona concealing a violent private reality. During interrogation, he confessed. When asked why he began killing, he answered, "Poverty." He claimed he originally intended only theft. When asked why he continued, he said, "Once it starts, it is hard to stop." When asked why he stopped, he gave 3 reasons. He was older, physically weaker, and did not want his crimes to affect his children's lives. When asked whether he regretted it, he said he did. But investigators noted his expression remained calm, almost indifferent. During evaluation, he was asked to complete a simple psychological drawing exercise. Draw a house, a tree, and a person. The house he drew resembled a temple. The tree was tall and thin. The person was a nude female figure. Analysts interpreted these elements as signs of distorted self-image, emotional rigidity, and severe behavioral disturbance. He was sentenced to death. Before execution, he repeatedly asked officials one question: "Will my son be affected by what I did?" In January, the sentence was carried out. Outside the courthouse, families of victims wept, not only from grief, but from the release of waiting. Some had spent nearly 30 years without answers.